When I arrived home and opened the door, it was stuffy inside the house. When I entered the living room, I was confronted with a surprising scene. There was my daughter lying unconscious all alone. My husband, who should have been present, was nowhere to be seen, so I quickly took my daughter to the hospital. Fortunately, there was no immediate danger to her life, but she ended up spending a few days in the hospital. Once my daughter's condition had somewhat stabilized, I called my husband.
Hey, where are you right now? Huh? I'm at the amusement park with Hannah. Is something wrong?
As he casually lied over the phone, I was left speechless, feeling a mix of fear, anger, and sadness. I was overwhelmed, not knowing how to handle the situation. While contemplating a response, tears streamed down my cheeks. I am Jenny, 30 years old this year, working as an office employee. I met my husband, Scott, at our workplace. Scott was a sales representative for one of our clients, and we got close after I offered him tea. At that time, I was a new employee there, so I felt nervous just to bring some tea to him, but to my surprise, I tripped and ended up drenching Scott. I turned pale and apologized profusely. However, he laughed it off, forgave me, and from then on, we often teased each other about that incident. At my workplace, where there were few people my age, it didn't take long for me to become friends with him, who was 2 years older. Over time, I found myself looking forward to his visits for business. We gradually started going out for meals and spending weekends together, eventually leading to a 3-year dating and marriage. I had a longing for a family, and Scott understood that, as I had lost my parents in a car accident when I was 20. At the time, I was a university student and couldn't accept the sudden death of my parents. Since I was an only child, I felt deeply loved and nurtured by my parents. We were a close-knit family of 3, planning a weekend trip together, just before the accident. Fortunately, my parents had left some money, so I was able to complete 4 years of university, but there was a gaping hole in my heart. Things started to brighten up in my life when I began dating Scott. He had experienced his parents' divorce and was raised by his mother, sharing many feelings about the ideal family.
We'll build a happy family together,
we discussed many times. Scott's mother, my mother-in-law, treated me very kindly, and I genuinely thought of her as my real mom. Even on days when Scott was there, we went to lunch or went shopping together. 2 years after marriage, our long-awaited child, a very cute daughter named Hannah, was born, and my mother-in-law adored her. At the same time as Hannah's birth, we set a goal to build our own home. So, we started saving money together. I was full of motivation, working towards our goal, but Scott's sudden actions surprised me. A few days after setting the goal, an event occurred. After finishing work and preparing dinner at home, Scott returned.
I'm home. Hi. I'm cooking dinner, so could you please give Hannah a bath?
Normally, he would respond with,
okay,
but this time, he said nothing. Concerned, I looked up. He stood there, with a serious expression.
Hey, isn't that a bit shocking? I quit my job.
I couldn't believe my ears at his words and asked,
What? What did you say? I said I quit my job. Couldn't you hear from this distance?
Scott laughed as he corrected himself, but I couldn't find it amusing at all.
What? What's going on?
His words made it impossible for me to focus on making dinner. I wonder what Scott is talking about. Despite our recent discussion about building our own home, what on earth does he mean by quitting his job?
In our recent discussion, I realized that, with my current salary, buying a home would be impossible. So, I thought about changing jobs,
Scott said with a nonchalant attitude. It seems he really quit his job, not as a prank.
Why did you quit without consulting me? You could have at least talked to me about it,
I said, gradually getting more irritated, unintentionally adopting a stronger tone.
Don't get so worked up. I've been thinking about changing jobs for a while, and the timing just happened to be now,
Scott said casually. Even though I manage our finances, I wanted to know what made him decide to change jobs. and how he planned to do it. However, once Scott makes up his mind, there's no changing it, so I gave up on saying more. In my mind, I'm desperately calculating the remaining balance in our savings and this month's budget.
It's not like I haven't thought about it. I'm considering places with a higher annual income than my current job, and having more days off is also better, right? I'm looking for a job right now, so please wait a little longer.
He added. Fine, I said. If he has thought things and taken an action, I have no choice but to trust him. I nodded slightly while saying this. However, he showed no signs of urgency, and there was no indication that he had started looking for a job. I'm the one covering all the living expenses, while he is job hunting. Although I wished he could at least help with household chores and picking up Hannah from daycare, there was no sign of him doing anything, and my burden kept increasing. Hey, at least help with things around the house, while you're not working, I said to Scott, who was relaxing in the living room after I came back from work. The room is messy, dishes are left as they are, and the laundry is piling up. Seeing the state of the house, something inside me snapped.
Okay, I'll do it.
No need to get so angry, he replied. What's with that attitude? It's been a while since you quit, and you still show no intention of working, or doing anything around the house or for Hannah. I don't think anyone would stay calm in this situation. I expressed my frustration as I watched Scott casually respond with a dismissive, okay. Lately, I've been getting irritated with him, leading to constant arguments.
Huh?
I'm going out, he said. Since our fights began, Scott started leaving the house, and not coming back on some days. Despite urging he several times to find a job, he dismissed it and said,
I'm doing it.
And days passed, with Scott still unemployed. One day, I had an unexpected business trip, and asked him to take care of things at home. The trip ended sooner than expected, so I took a half-day off and decided to return home in the early afternoon. My usual commute times were getting cooler, but this midday return was unexpectedly hot, and I found myself sweating. I took off my jacket and hurried home. Upon opening the door, I felt hot air inside. Entering the living room, I was met with a shocking sight. Hannah was lying there alone. Scott, who was supposed to be taking care of her, was nowhere to be found, so I rushed Hannah to the hospital. Luckily, there were no life-threatening issues, but she had to stay in the hospital for a few days. After Hannah's condition somewhat stabilized, I called Scott.
Hello. Where are you right now? Huh? I'm at the amusement park with Hannah. Is something wrong?
He calmly lied over the phone, leaving me speechless, and even feeling a sense of fear.
Hey, is something wrong?
Scott asked me because I didn't answer. But through the phone, I could clearly hear a woman's laughter in the background. Scott seemed oblivious. Faced with fear, I became a mess of anger and sadness, not knowing what to do. As I hesitated to react, tears streamed down my cheeks, and I ended the call. There were several more missed calls from him, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Overwhelmed by information and in a daze for a while, I finally began to think about the current situation. Regardless of the temporary nature of Hannah's hospitalization, I had to deal with Scott's suspected infidelity. Leaving Hannah alone at home was unacceptable, but if infidelity was the cause, I would have to deal with it accordingly. The more calmly I thought about it, the more anger welled up, rather than sadness. While I worked hard, Scott might have been preoccupied with an affair. Trying to find proof, I checked Scott's social media, and my suspicion of infidelity became a certainty. In his posts, there were glimpses of a woman, with reflections of nudity in windows and other places. How did I not notice this until now? It was strange, and I realized how desperate I was to support the household. After that, I decided to return home once, to prepare Hannah's hospital necessities and hospital expenses. Of course, there was no sign of Scott. As I casually checked my bank book to prepare for the hospital expenses, I noticed that money had been withdrawn from the savings account for our home. Most likely, the unemployed Scott had been using money from the home savings account without my knowledge. At this point, I decided to end things with my husband and opted for a divorce. I packed the bare essentials and left the house. Before returning to the hospital, I stopped by my mother-in-law's house to discuss the situation with him.
Welcome. It must have been tough.
She greeted me with a smile, having contacted her in advance.
I have something to discuss with you about your son,
I said, sensing a different atmosphere than usual. She moved to the living room, and I shared the entire history of my husband with her.
Is that really true? That our son would do something like that?
My mother-in-law seemed very surprised and somewhat skeptical. After saying that, my mother-in-law fell silent, but suddenly took out her phone and started making a call.
I want to believe in my son, but when I see your expression, I can't believe it's a lie. I'll call and ask.
It seems like she is planning to ask Scott directly.
Hello? Mom, what's going on all of a sudden?
I felt irritated, just hearing Scott's nonchalant voice over the phone.
I was thinking of coming to visit now. Just wanted to check if you're at home,
she teased Scott. I wondered how Scott would respond. I felt my heart pounding so loudly that I could hear it.
Hannah and I are at the amusement park right now. Let's do it another time,
Scott said and abruptly hung up the phone. She trembled quietly.
Unforgivable. What is he thinking? I can't believe it. Jenny, I 100% believe you. You and Hannah can stay here,
she said.
Thank you.
From then on, without saying anything to Scott, I decided to stay at her house. Hannah was safely discharged from the hospital and initially bewildered. She seemed happy living with her grandmother. Scott seems to have contacted my mother-in-law about our sudden disappearance with Hannah, but she's pretending not to know. While Scott did reach out to me, I refused to respond until I was ready. Several weeks had passed since we stayed at my mother-in-law's house.
Hey! What's going on here?
Scott suddenly barged in, while my mother-in-law, Hannah, and I were having a meal. He held a paper with the word divorce written on it, and thrust it towards me.
It's exactly what it looks like,
I calmly told Scott, and instructed Hannah to go to another room.
Why the sudden divorce? I don't get it. I thought you disappeared from home.
And here you are. Scott was visibly angry.
Did Mom know about this and keep quiet? Besides, I can't use the bank account anymore. How am I, an unemployed guy, supposed to live? Why are you even mad? It's just what you deserve.
I handed Scott another document. As Scott read through it, his expression gradually turned pale.
What is this?
That's my line, I replied. I had hired a private investigator to look into Scott's affair. Even after we left, Scott had been meeting his affair partner frequently. Therefore, the investigation concluded quickly, and the detailed report I received made everything clear.
Moreover, it's not just about the affair. On the day I asked you to take care of Hannah, she collapsed from heatstroke inside the house. It was tough until she was hospitalized. The amusement park story was a big lie. You even lied to your own mother. Don't bring up old stories now. When is this from? You also let my mother lie to me.
Scott, perhaps realizing his affair was exposed, retorted aggressively. Faced with his irredeemable attitude, I sighed in exasperation.
Sigh? Besides, I closed the account because you had been misusing the money I worked so hard to save. I'm in the middle of job hunting. It's inevitable. How can I live without money?
Whose mouth is saying such a thing? It's already beyond discussion.
You were misusing the money I desperately worked to save for your affair. I can't live with you anymore, Scott. We're getting a divorce. What? You're being too selfish. How am I supposed to live? Enough of this.
My mother-in-law, who had been silent until then, shouted at Scott.
If you heard everything, stop making excuses and justifying yourself. It's embarrassing beyond belief. Admit what you've done and reflect on it. If you don't value your family, you can't continue a marriage. Quietly step back.
With my mother-in-law's scolding, Scott became quiet and eventually accepted the divorce. Surely, the fact that she was a single parent must be a factor. Scott agreed to the divorce, but now he was stubbornly resisting property division.
Half of the savings are mine,
Scott insisted. However, most of it was money I received from my parents' life insurance before our marriage. I explained that Scott had already spent more than that amount. Upon realizing that the savings couldn't be divided, and he would have to pay alimony, Scott came to apologize, even resorting to kneeling down. Of course, I didn't forgive him. Witnessing Scott's actions, my mother-in-law decided to cut ties with him. In the end, Scott struggled to find a job again, burdened with paying alimony and child support, and seemed to be in debt. His affair partner apparently left him, after learning about his situation. Since I am not a forgiving person, I, of course, demanded alimony from his affair partner as well. Even after the divorce, my mother-in-law continued to cherish Hannah and me. And we live happily as a family of 3. I am still saving money as usual, hoping that one day, we can build a home and live together as a family of 3.